So the aim of my presentation was to try and make the argument that the Marikana Commission, in important senses, followed in a tradition of states intervening in particular ways to deal with moments of crisis, and in the case of this, of particular incidents of political violence. And in the case of South Africa, although this is not simply a South African phenomenon, we've had numerous examples, unfortunately, where the state, both the, well, particularly the apartheid state, convene commissions in ways to try and organize and take control of the narratives of moments of violence. And I attempted to show fairly briefly that in two incidents, although I think there's several others that one could use as examples, the Snyman Commission of 1962-1963 and the Salih Commission of 1976-77 show that the state attempted, by convening the commissions, to create an intervention whereby aiming ostensibly to get to the objective truth of what happened at those events, that a particular narrative could be organized. And that has always had a reasonable degree of success. But of course, what's important, amongst other things, is that those two commissions occurred under very different circumstances. What I didn't do, and it's not the aim of my presentation, was to compare the moments of violence themselves. What I'm interested in terms of this paper, is how narratives are produced about key moments of crisis and violence, the role that commissions play in that, and thirdly, the extent to which those narratives produced by commissions, largely to support an official narrative, is challenged over time. In the case of the Snyman and Salih commissions, there was very little contestation, although there was contestation within the commissions. But in the case of the Snyman Commission, it happened at a time of extreme repression. 1962-1963, South Africa was living in was a highly repressive society. So even though there were questions about matters of fact and so on, the kind of narrative produced by the Snyman Commission was largely uncontested. And even when critical scholars like Tom Lodge wrote about the Paarl March, that was the matter of concern for the Snyman Commission, he largely adopted the narrative, although not the interpretation, but the narrative of the Snyman Commission. 15 years later, or 14 years later, the Salih Commission's findings were based to a large extent on the police records. So what one had in these commissions was that narratives were structured, interpretations were structured, based largely on official records, mainly the police, so that the narratives that came out of these commissions were, even though aspects were questioned, were largely uncontested. Later on, as was the case with the Salih Commission, there was a significant challenge, and those challenges to the narrative came from researchers that went to collect the oral histories of participants. So what I suggested when one looks at the Farlam Commission was very, very different circumstances. From day one, as we were bombarded by the media of a particular narrative that attempted to show that the miners on the Koppie attacked the police and the police shot in self-defense. That was, in the first day, the kind of repeated narrative that came out. And in fact, on that first day, I read an excerpt from a COSATU Central Committee meeting. A few hours after the massacre, that was a narrative that even COSATU repeated. But what I said was that almost as soon as that happened, there were questions. So even before the commission was formally gazetted in September, a serious contestation already took place about what narrative should come out. And of course, the state established the commission for the same reason that states, the apartheid state, created commissions to deal with moments of violence in order to organize the narrative, to take charge of the narrative, in order to produce an official narrative based on fact, where experts would give evidence and check the facts and so on. The point I made was that in that first 6 weeks after the massacre, the Congress Alliance, the South African Communist Party, the ANC, and COSATU articulated a particular interpretation and narrative of what happened. But within weeks, in fact, within a week, there was a different process, contesting all of that, drawing on views from workers who were at the copy, views from journalists who began to ask questions about what happened at the second copy. So I was pointing to a process that sets the Farlam Commission apart from other commissions, and try to make the argument that alternative narratives began to emerge almost immediately. So that even before the commission began to sit, there was contestation. So it wasn't as if the commission had a monopoly over the process of creating an official narrative and controlling the process of expert evidence, of collecting forensic evidence and truths, kind of objective truths, in order to create an authoritative view and narrative or interpretations about what happened at Marikana. There were processes outside the commission that also, as we heard in the proceedings during this conference, that also came into the commission. So there were multiple sites of contestation about the narrative. And ultimately, I say that what's important about this process is that it also reflected the weakening authority of the government and the weakening authority of the ANC. It no longer has that capacity, if it ever had, it's a question of whether it ever had, the capacity via a political intervention and mechanisms such as the commission to take full control over the production of an official, authoritative, and perhaps even hegemonic narrative about what happened at Marikana. Last year, the History Workshop and SERI recognized that it would be useful to reflect on the commission in a way that brought together scholars from different disciplines. So an interdisciplinary conversation, because often we operate in disciplinary silos. And as we saw over the last couple of days, when you bring kind of legal minds, lawyers, in conversation with social scientists and journalists, et cetera, then you can have a very kind of fascinating and productive conversation. So we recognized very early on, and this partly draws on a conference that the History Workshop organized many years ago, reflecting on the TRC, which, by the way, was entitled Commissioning the Past, right? This one we call Commissioning the Present, in order to, and the purpose of that conference was again to bring together people who were part of the commission, who could reflect from the inside of the commission, so the lawyers, civil society, people who kind of engaged the commission one step removed through the media and through various campaigns, and to see whether we can develop an interesting set of conversations that would in fact produce multiple interpretations about the meaning of the commission, its role in engaging the events at Marikana, and what process of interpretation of meaning given to the commission can come out of this process. So in that sense, from the point of view of the History Workshop, the interdisciplinary engagement has been very important. And from the point of view of us as social historians, it's and what my paper deals with is how has the commission and various entities related directly to the commission or indirectly through campaigns, through kind of writing papers and so on, what kind of histories are being produced? What kind of narratives are being produced? How has contestations over memory about the Marikana events affected productions of knowledge around the Commission. And I think that we have found this extremely useful because one, it's produced fascinating engagements, but also it is very clear that there isn't a single dominant narrative that has come out. It has been contested, and from our point of view, that is good.